morning, Jeffrey.
Good morning, Joey. It's been a long
What?
time since we talked to each other.
Yeah, it's been a
Yeah,
long
it's
time.
been.
It's probably because I've been doing some podcasts in the past few days,
Mhm.
and everyone that I'm talking is like, "Oh, it's been a while."
Yeah,
But in most cases, it's been like I guess 2 years.
yeah, could be. Not even sure if it's been before Corona or somewhere in between. I have
Yeah,
no idea, to be honest.
could be. How have you been?
uh, Pretty good. No complaints. During the Corona period, marketing wise, things were in the beginning. I was like, okay, what's going to happen now?
Hmm.
Uh, is the work still coming in, or is it going down, or what is going on? But actually, the thing was that people couldn't perform on stage, not just in the dance scene, but in all scenes, and that meant they went into the studio. So actually, I was more busy than ever. And usually during summer, when all festivals are taking place and things like that, that's the more kind of like relaxed period because everybody's on stage.
Yeah,
But during summer of 2020 and 21, it was really extremely busy. Sometimes I really had to let go of work because it
yeah,
was that busy. So yeah, but
crazy,
now it
right?
but now it's back to normal. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
Nice. And you rebuilt the studio, the studio.
Yeah, some time ago, about yeah, actually, the day when the lockdown started, construction worker came over. They took down our bathroom and they took down a lot of things, including parts of my studio. And yeah, we did a full rebuild of the office, the bathroom, of course, but
Nice.
also part of the studio. So the complete back wall is totally different, and some other things. So yeah, there's a lot of things going on,
Yeah.
and that the office part is also the construction work part because next to my mastering studio, I also own Dutch Audio, which is a brand for high-end studio equipment for yeah, mastering studios, mixing studios worldwide.
Mhm.
And we simply needed the office because I was making this equipment, really high-end equipment, in a really small corner in the attic, and it just didn't work. So I needed a way better place than what I had. So now we have that place, and things are still growing and expanding. And
Yeah.
we're hiring a software developer now, and we're going to work with dealers, and it's going to be pretty huge actually. So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I
yeah.
still remember that last time we talked, you mentioned that you were working on this.
hmm
And at that time, the last thing I know is that a big mastering guy was using your plugin.
True. Yeah, it's not a plugin. It's
Yeah, the
hardware.
hardware.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Bob Cutts, which is one of
Yeah.
the most famous mastering engineers worldwide, he wrote basically the Bible of mastering to a lot of mastering engineers and also people not into mastering. They read that book or have that book or know at least about that book.
Dutch
And
guy or?
no, it's an American guy.
Okay.
And about the funny thing is that about I think about 50% of all the equipment that I built is going to the USA, and only maybe like 3 to 4%, maybe 5% stays in the Netherlands. The
Wow.
rest is just all over the place, all over the world, from Australia to Taiwan to the USA to I don't know, like everywhere.
And how
But
do they find you? Like yeah, how do they
yeah,
find your
that's
business?
really funny. We never did anything with promotion or marketing or whatever. It just basically happened. And all of a sudden, I already knew Bob Katz from the internet, from Facebook and things and groups. And all of a sudden, I got a mail from Bob like, okay, I see you're doing these kind of things. I want one, so build me one. So I built one for him, and he was really happy about it. And he gave me some tips like, you could try this, you could do that. And he really helped me out as well.
Hmm.
But because Bob Katz was using one and promoting it on Facebook, in mastering engineers groups, I didn't have to do anything with marketing or whatever. It just happened. So
Nice.
yeah, that's really cool. And about a year and a half after that, I got another mail from Bob like, okay, it's time to expand. So I want a bigger version now with more options and things like that. So he basically has two. Well, he sold the other one, but yeah,
Yeah.
he's a really good guy, and yeah, that really helped a lot. And now,
Okay.
right now, we're in the progress of upgrading all equipment that we have. Right now, the old version was basically a mechanical unit, so big push buttons, big turning knobs, and things like that. So it was not really a clever unit. So if you had to make a recall, you had to write down everything, and then you could do a recall. But now, actually, production started. We're going to release new products which are computer controlled, which means
Nice.
the unit itself basically looks the same, but now it has a display and encoders instead of step switches and things like that. But it's connected through an Ethernet port, so it's connected to your network,
Hmm.
and you're running a plugin of that device in your DAW so that you control it with automation and everything from your DAW, so Wavelab, Cubase,
Nice.
whatever
Yeah.
you're using, and you can save all settings, which means you open the session again, and bam, all of a sudden you have all settings back again.
That was the
So
biggest problem to me when I was looking for hardware back in the
mhm,
days.
yeah,
What I really never really understood why people would make the leap to go to hardware is because it was so unuser friendly.
yeah,
And
it depends. I think computers are user unfriendly. I like to touch buttons. I'm more like an old school guy. I'm
yeah, yeah,
51, so I like to touch buttons. I like to turn knobs and things. It's way more intuitive.
yeah,
But
true.
indeed, also with synthesizers and things like that, or a mixer or whatever, you it's not like you open a session and all of a sudden your settings are back. But now with these kind of things, it's possible to have, at least for the master console, to have your settings back, and it's also
Yeah.
possible to automate levels and mid-sides levels and things like that. It's all possible then. It's
And
going to be really cool.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that's perfect to me because what you say, like twisting the knobs, was something that felt that would be great. Like that's why that was a reason why I started to search for hardware. But
Hmm.
then I found out like, oh shit, I have to remember all the settings for each project. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, that's
True.
never going to happen, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
and
I think the big advantage of not remembering settings, especially if you're making music, like using synthesizers, drum machines, whatever, you're actually finishing a song. You're
yeah,
actually
it's creative. Yeah,
it's creative, because it's not like, okay, I'm going to extend this track later on, like making the arrangement or whatever, doing the mix. No, it's not like you save all settings and you open up the settings again the next day when you're working on another project. You can
yeah,
only work on that project and you have to finish it. So I
yeah.
think that's a big advantage of working with hardware. So
You're kind of being pushed to make a decision.
true. Yeah.
And yeah, it's funny. Yeah,
Yeah.
now that you mention it, it's actually
Yeah.
a good
Yeah.
strategy to
Yeah, even
finish a product.
also with what you see nowadays with plugins, if you have a plugin, you see all settings like, I don't know, like an EQ frequency. It says 50.253 hertz, for instance. I see a lot of people changing that to exactly 50 hertz by
No, yeah,
typing in values.
yeah,
Music is not about numbers. Music is not about values. Music is about feeling, like getting a great emotion out of it. And that's the cool thing with hardware. You're not looking at numbers. You're just turning knobs like, okay, this sounds great. And it doesn't matter if it's 50.123 or 49.8 point whatever. It's
yeah.
just, it sounds great. And then it is great. So,
That's actually a really good point because there's a lot of people I know as well who want to have round numbers.
yeah,
So
why?
a
Why?
thousand or 1500 and not like 1128.
No. With hardware, you don't even see those numbers. So
Yeah,
you just turn knobs until it sounds great. And it could be that a value just in between those numbers sounds even better. So in that case, you will pick the sound that sounds better. It might not look great if you might see it on the screen, but that doesn't matter. If it
yeah,
sounds great, it is great. And it's about emotion, it's about music, not
yeah.
you're not a bookkeeper if you're making music.
So I also remember that you once told me this with when I was in your studio is that when you master or mix a song, you sometimes I'm not sure what it was like you turn off the screen or you close your eyes. One of the two things.
I'm working with three screens. I have one screen in my desk, so I have to look down to see the screen, which is my main screen. Then I have a big TV. Yeah, it's hard to see, but it's a big TV, which is standing in the back there.
Hmm.
And when I look straight into the front wall, I don't see the screen. Sure, I see it from the angle of my eyes, but I don't see the screen. I don't see the plugins. I don't see what I'm doing. which means not looking at a screen means you're listening better
Yeah.
because, especially men, the men and people in particular cannot do two things at the same time. You cannot look and listen exactly the same thing, and that's why blind people, for example, have way better hearing
Yeah.
because they don't have anything to see.
Yeah.
They just focus on their ears.
Yeah.
So,
They
yeah,
train their what's the name, like senses, the different,
yeah,
like if everything works, like your eyes work, your ears work, then everything's kind of all good. But
yeah.
if you're blind, all the focus
The
has to
other
go to your
folks,
ears.
yeah, true, yeah, and
Yeah.
that's what's also not the same, of course, but that's also happening when working with hardware. You're not looking at a screen; you're just turning
Yeah.
knobs until it sounds right. So, and I think
Great
that's
tip.
really important. So, yeah,
It's super basic, but I think that's the power of it. As in,
yeah,
I think most people forget about these basic things, like
yeah,
how your brain and mind works. Because if you simply close your eyes, you will start to hear better.
true, totally true.
Weird, weird.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
yeah, thanks.
yeah,
Great
yeah,
tip.
yeah. It's the same with what I have on my screen, the big screen over there,
Hmm.
which is about, I think, 2 meters away from where I'm sitting.
Hmm.
I'm using just that screen just for my plugins. And actually, because my eyes are not that good anymore and the screen is that far away, I actually have to focus on seeing the numbers. So even when using plugins, I don't really see the numbers. I just turn knobs until it sounds right.
Yeah,
So yeah,
great tip. I think a lot of producers will start to use this
I hope so. Yeah,
after listening to
don't
this.
focus on the numbers. Focus on how it
Yeah,
sounds.
turn
It's
off your
that's
screen every now and
turn
then,
off your
or close
screen.
your
Yeah,
eyes.
totally true. Yeah. So
Talking about tips, because what I wanted to talk to you about today is your experience of what you see happening a lot when you receive a master or a mix from a certain producer. Like, what are the the most common things you run into, and how can a producer solve it?
one of the big issues that still happens quite often is that people, especially in the dance scene, uh, mix into a limiter. So they
Hmm.
have a limiter on their master bus, and they make their mix decisions based on that limiter. But for mastering, if you send it out to a mastering engineer, you don't want that limit to be on because you're literally limited to what you can do about it.
Yeah,
Because yeah, it's already crushed and a lot of energy is already gone. Um, but when you mixed into a limiter and you remove that limiter so that you can send it over to the mastering engineer, a lot of times the mix simply falls apart, which means the bass drum is too loud, or this is too soft, or the output is clipping, or there could be a lot of things going wrong. So, and that happens because you're mixing into a limiter and you're making decisions based on that. So, I always advise to don't mix into a limiter, but it's a good idea to have a limiter on your master bus so that you can switch it on every now and then so that you get a feeling of what
yeah,
it sounds like after it's been limited,
yeah,
because a limiter could also add a certain sound to it, and it could be that all of a sudden you come to the conclusion like, okay, my mix is not that good because the limiter really needs to work hard to get to a certain loudness. And that's also the reason why people tend to mix into a limiter, but you have to think the other way around. Just
yeah,
mix without a limiter and sometimes turn it on so that you can have a listen like, okay, this is what it's going to sound like.
yeah,
A rough ballpark, of course, because it's never going to be the same as real mastering, because mastering is not just a limiter. There's way more to it. But
yeah,
um, at least you get a rough idea of what is going on with your music then. So
yeah.
so
That's
that
the way
happens a lot. Yeah.
That's the way how I used to do it. As in, I was just mixing the song, and then I had Isotope on the mastering, on the master channel every now and then when I wanted to experience the full embodied sound, sort
True.
of.
Yeah.
I just turned it on, opened up the volume, listened how it sounded, and
Hmm.
then turned it off again and started mixing.
Yeah, what you could also do, because people are like, yeah, but it's going to be way louder when you're sending it to a limiter, and then it's hard to compare to what it will sound like. But you also have an output knob in your limiter, so maybe you have to set it back like I don't know, like 12 dB maybe. So the
Mm.
output gain is set back to minus 12, but you still get the same level. And don't look at the numbers again, but just use your ears so that it's level matched, so that you have an idea of what it sounds like
Yeah.
at the same level. So
And do you still think like, at least the last time I make music, I really liked Ozotope as like an easy to use plugin, which gets pretty decent results pretty quickly.
it actually can get really good results.
Yeah.
A couple of weeks ago or a month ago, I don't know, Ozone 10 came out. I
Hmm.
instantly bought it. I instantly bought the upgrade because I really think it's a great plugin. But mastering and making music is not about the plugins you use or the hardware you use. It's about how you use it.
Hmm.
There are some really cool things in Ozone, like the limiter, for instance, is really good. It has its own sound, and if I hear something, I can instantly hear that it's an ozone limiter. But 9 out of 10 times, that's also because people pushed it too much. They tried to get the loudness from the limiter.
Yeah.
A limiter will not make it loud. Actually, if there's a speed limit on a highway, it's not like, there's a speed limit. I can only drive 80 kilometers an hour. You're not going faster. You're limited to that speed. That's what a limiter does. It literally limits the output. It might sound perceived louder, but you're actually limiting the output. Loudness is not
Ah.
coming from a limiter. You will never get loud results from a limiter.
So what does bring the loudness in a song?
Um, Arrangement, mixing. Um, some people try to make the breaks and drops and everything. They want it to make it all loud, but loudness only exists if there's something which is not loud. So the
Yeah.
difference between less loud, a break, and a drop, that's where the loudness comes from.
The
So you have
balance.
no, not the ballad. So
No, but I
so
like the balance
Oh, the
between.
balance. Sorry, yeah,
Yeah.
I thought you said ballads.
Oh no, 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 no.
Now the balance. It's all about the balance. So if you have a break and the break is really soft, and all of a sudden the drop comes in, bam! Then you get loudness, and it doesn't even have to be that loud.
Hmm.
It's about dynamics. The difference between loud and less loud. That's where the loudness comes from. And that's what I sometimes think is funny is that some EDM producers, EDM DJs mostly actually, they have a track which is crushed to death. So all life is out of it. But what do? They make kind of like a fade out in the break, like 3, 4 dB down or something like
Yeah.
that. And then when the drop comes in, then they take it back to zero. So you see an actual fade,
Yeah.
but it's not the same because it's still crushed. You kind of get that feeling. But if you make the breaks less limited, less loud, you will get way more impact. That's where the loudness comes from.
Ah, that's yeah. That's also good to know for a lot of a lot of producers because it's so intuitive to say like crush it, like bring it to the max because
Yeah,
I want to make it sound loudest possible.
yeah,
But
yeah.
that's actually contrary to what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, it is. And
Hmm.
the cool thing is also that what a lot of people try to do, they want to make it more loud. So they add another layer of synthesizers and another, I don't know, bass drum, another snare drum, another this, another that. But the more elements you add, the more of the less room there is to breathe, for the mix to breathe. So it means it will sound perceived less loud. It might look louder on the meters, so a number, but in fact, it's less loud.
Yeah.
So use less elements, try to mute some channels, see what it sounds like. Does it sound better? Then remove those channels. You don't
Yeah.
need it. Some time ago, I had a project for a client of mine, and he was like, "Yeah, could you also mix this track? Because I have really a lot of problems mixing it, but I'm not a mixing engineer." So I sent it over to another mixing engineer who did the mixing, and I did the mastering afterwards. And it sounded great. And so the question from the producer was, to the mixing engineer was in between with the emails of things like, yeah, what exactly did you do? Because I had like 5 or 6 bass drums, and yeah, it was all layering that, and it didn't sound good. What did you do? I muted 5 bass drums, and I only had 1 bass drum left, and then it sounded good.
Yeah.
So he basically took like a lot of channels out, and it sounded great. So
Yeah.
less is more always. So
That's
with these
that,
kind
that
of things, yeah.
that's what I see a lot with clients as well. Like if they struggle with their song, as in it doesn't feel, it doesn't sound finished, or it doesn't sound good enough. If you simply start muting a simple few of the elements, most of the time their like space opens up and the track
True.
sounds better
Yeah, true.
in
Yeah,
most
yeah.
cases.
But for some reason, um, people think that it's better to add more channels because it needs to sound bigger. So
Yeah,
I need to add more. No, think the other way around. Try to mute some channels, make
less
it
is more.
smaller, which makes it more open and more
Yeah,
powerful, especially in a club. Because if you're playing your music in a club, also people try to um, emulate the sound of a big room, like they're adding a lot of reverbs and things like that. No, think the other way around. The room itself adds reverb. So if you want to make it sound big, don't add that reverb, but let the room add that reverb.
mm, exactly. And doesn't that bring a problem if you listen to big room music on, let's say, AirPods?
Yeah, true. It's not like you should mute all your reverbs and don't use
Yeah.
reverbs, but people tend to use reverb on everything.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So
Yeah.
it's more like don't use a reverb on a bass drum, don't use a reverb on that. Just use it on, I don't know, like a lead synthesizer or things like
Yeah.
that, but don't overdo it. And also, don't use too long,
Tails.
yeah, the long tails
Yeah.
because that will also clutter your mix. It will also fill in the empty gaps of your mix,
Yeah.
which means there's less room to breathe, which means it's less open and less powerful. So
Yeah, I think you should approach music as a living organism. You know,
it is,
it
yeah,
should breathe, it should move,
yeah.
and it's not this constant sausage
No, no,
without any balance.
living.
And
Yeah,
yeah,
that's why classical music, for instance, has a lot
mm,
of impact because it's really soft and it goes down, and all of a sudden, then whoosh, it goes up, and then you're like,
yeah,
"Wow, what's happening now?" All music should be like that,
yeah.
not just classical music, but I think all music should be like that. Actually, the fun fact is that I have a what's it called? I wrote something about the dynamics in a mix and how it can improve your loudness on, for instance, Spotify.
Oh, nice.
Because if you're making the breaks lower in level, the overall loves value will be lower because of that. So just throwing some numbers, let's say if you have a track and the breaks are minus 10 loves and the drops are minus 8 loves. So there's a difference of 2 loves. So the
Hmm.
overall value will be something like, I don't know, like minus 9. That will be taken down like 5 dB. But if you have the breaks at minus 16 or minus 17 or whatever, and the drops at minus 9, the difference between those levels is way bigger.
Yeah,
And that means that the overall level, the integrated level, it's what it's called, will be lower, which means it will be turned down less by Spotify and YouTube and every other streaming
yeah,
service. And it means that the louder sections will actually sound louder.
yeah.
Um,
This is actually good to mention because I think in the last podcast we did, you really explained this into detail about
mhm.
how streaming services treat your song,
Yeah,
like what the difference is with loves and loudness and stuff. Um, so if people are not familiar with that, go back and listen to that episode. But it's really good to realize that even in this matter, like the more balance you bring into your song, the louder people will perceive it
yeah,
on streaming services.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's
Because
all
if you
about yeah, it's
yeah,
all
because
about
if you
perceived
listen to
loudness.
certain EDM songs, especially the old ones from 2014, 15, which are all crushed, if you
Yeah,
listen to them on Spotify, pretty soft actually.
yeah, they are,
Yeah,
but they are like people are like, yeah, but my song is reduced to minus 14, and it still doesn't sound as loud as that song or that song. Totally true,
yeah,
because it's one sausage of minus 14. But if you have a sausage with bumps in it, those
yeah,
bumps will be louder than minus 40
yeah,
because all those loudness normalization standards work with um, the integrated loudness, so the beginning till the end, and that's where the number comes from, and that's when they take it down. And all some people also think that the loudness normalization is a limiter. It's not. It's just a volume knob. They just
mm,
turn down the volume knob, so they're not changing your music. So
yeah.
you don't have to be afraid of that. So
Yeah, but still, I must say that I'm not sure how that works, but I listen to a lot of different styles of genres of music on Spotify, for example. and especially if you listen to the older style, so the disco-ish kind of music,
Hmm.
um, most of those songs still sound a lot softer than
True.
yeah, most
Yeah.
more recent songs.
Yeah. True. That's because a lot of those old songs they just uploaded the old master, which
Yeah.
was not the standard. The guideline is minus 14 loves. All streaming services basically work at minus 14 loves.
Mhm.
There's a lot of misconception about that, but they work at minus 14 loves. But if your song is lower than minus 14 loves, so let's say minus 16, then it will simply be 2 dB lower in level. And those
They
older
won't push it
songs,
up.
now they won't push it up. Luckily, because otherwise it would be limited. That's
Hmm.
what Spotify used to do. They have, maybe you've seen it, you have three settings in Spotify where you
Yeah.
can choose from, which is normal, which is minus 14. You have, I think it's called dynamic, which is at minus 23. And you have loud, or I don't know what it's called, and that's at minus 11 loves. And like a year, 1.5 year ago, they changed it to not limiting it, your song anymore. But before that, if your song was like, I don't know, minus 14, they used a limiter to bring that song to
Yeah.
minus 11 at the loud setting. So
Ah,
even if
okay.
your song was dynamic, they crushed it. But now they use a different system. It's
May-
too
Yeah,
complex
maybe
to
that's why
explain.
I notice it now, but now it really stands out to me. If I listen to a certain playlist, I really notice volume differences in certain songs. But
Yeah,
that definitely has to could have something to do with the fact that it's old, and that's why
yeah.
you see a lot of, let's say, Bee Gees and ABBA music which says remastered. You know?
Yeah, yeah. It's not always a good idea to do that, to be honest. But sometimes the remastered version sounds
Yeah.
just louder and it works in the playlist. Um, but not always. Also, there's another thing with Spotify and other streaming services as well, which you have to take into account. Not all Bluetooth speakers and things like that make use of the loudness normalization when you stream it to that Bluetooth speaker, or a Chromecast audio, for instance. You will not make use of the loudness normalization then. So
Okay, so
maybe
how does that
that's
work?
um, not. I don't know exactly how it works, but I have a Chromecast audio, which they don't sell anymore. Too bad. But I use that. I open Spotify on my phone and I simply cast it to that Chromecast audio. But then you get the actual level and no loudness normalization. The same goes for Bluetooth
Hmm.
speakers, but I think it also depends on how they implemented it. So loudness normalization doesn't always work. Also, if you use it in a web browser, like yeah, if you open Spotify in your web browser, you're
Mhm.
also not making use of that loudness normalization.
Hmm. I
So
didn't know that.
yeah,
How about Sonos? Do you know that?
to be honest, no idea. No.
Because I do feel like everything here in my house is Sonos, but I do feel like it sounds different, as in it's kind of compressed or it's kind of like a hi-fi system, you know, like it
Yeah,
sounds boosted.
yeah. I think Sonos is Bluetooth.
No, it's you have Bluetooth, but we have it over like Wi-Fi.
Okay. Yeah. To be honest, I have no idea how that
Hmm.
works. I've never went into depth with
No, okay.
Sonos
It's just that
systems.
I thought
Yeah.
like because it is some sort of streaming service because you use Spotify to stream your music, but yeah, it's a bit unclear to me how
Okay.
that
Yeah.
works.
I have no idea, to be honest. So
Oh, no problem.
maybe I will dig into it. Yeah.
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 Something I wanted to add is, which we talked about earlier, about the dynamics and also with something I learned in Rock Academy, a school, which I've been to, which really made sense to me, but I never really thought about it. Is if you make music and with synthesizers and stuff, the power of hardware as well is the fact that you use your fingers. So the example you gave of orchestral music, classical music, a violin, for example, gets played by the human arm, and the human arm is never consistent in the
Yeah.
strength of something that you use.
Yeah.
So that's why it sounds so organic. And once you start making computer music, let's say, it's all like every note is the same hit. But if you
True.
hit a keyboard with your finger, it's never the exact same.
Yeah.
It's always
True.
a little bit slightly
Yeah.
different.
Yeah. But also, for instance, an analog synthesizer, it's voltages and things like that. Especially,
Yeah.
for instance, a mini moog, it will never be the same. Even if you play the same note like an hour later, it could be totally different because it warmed up more or things like that.
Yeah.
That's also what you want. Also, a 909 drum machine, for instance. Um, the sounds itself influence each other because if you have now to think out of my mind the snare drum and a tom, if you play that together, they use the same oscillators and things, and they combine it, and it sounds different. But also the sequencer back in, I think it was released in 1984, 1985, something like that. The timing wasn't correct, so
Yeah.
it was literally living. It might use
Yeah.
the same tempo all the time, but that didn't mean that the notes were all starting exactly at the same time.
Yeah.
So it has kind of like a life of itself. Same with the
Yeah.
303. It's the same thing. It doesn't. The sequencer is pretty random when it comes to
Never
that.
perfect. Yeah.
It's never perfect, and that's why it sounds good.
That was one
Music,
of the
yeah,
that
music
was one
should.
of the things I learned from Chocolate Puma.
Hmm.
I once saw in a video that the only thing that they use as like a strict rhythm is the bass line. So it's
Yeah,
the kick, like boom, boom. That's set,
yeah,
but everything around that gets played in with their hands. So
yeah.
drums,
True.
percussion.
Yeah, I did the
Uh,
same thing when I was making music. I
yeah,
never used the quantize function on, I don't know,
exactly.
hi hats, snare drums, things like that. I never.
Yeah, because if you
Yeah,
use quantization, I don't know.
quantization. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, you kind of take out the living aspect of it.
yeah. True, totally true. Yeah,
And I think that that's an important thing for at least the new generation of producers to realize, because it's so easy to select everything and say quantize. But
you take the life out of it. It's a
yeah,
computer
you
file. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, it's a computer file and it's
yeah,
not a human, breathing, living organism
yeah,
anymore.
yeah. What I used back then, I was when I was playing like a melody line or something. I just played it a couple of times in a row, and then most of the times I used two of those and used that in a loop. And I sometimes changed it like, okay, now I'm going to use this one, now I'm going to use
Yeah,
that one. So that I had kind of like a live feeling to it. And that's why disco, for instance, that's why it sounds funky and that's why it sounds alive, because it
exactly.
was never the same. Even the
Yeah,
tempo changes over time, which is a nightmare for DJs, by the way,
yeah,
especially if you play vinyl. But
exactly.
um that's why it sounds that lively. Yeah.
Did you see the movie about James Brown, Get Up, of Get On Up?
No. Is it
It's like it was on Netflix, but they took it off.
okay?
I don't know why.
Okay.
But it's a movie made about the life of James Brown, and you see a lot of like studio moments in there where he's in the studio with his band,
Mm-hmm.
and he was crazy when it comes down to rhythm. So
Yeah.
the drummer started playing. He was like, "No, later, later. Like put that snare later, like
Yeah.
a friction slide later," and then the funk started. You know,
Yeah,
like
true.
was
Funk
so
is
cool to
the
see.
cool thing is that funk is not in between the, it's not on the notes itself, but it's
Exactly.
actually living in between the notes.
Yeah.
And that's why I also don't believe in music which is faster than something like 140, 145 BPM, because then the simply said the distance
It's
between
too.
those notes will
Yeah.
be too small, so
Yeah.
there's no room for the funk. So
Yeah.
there's no room for the soul.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Good stuff. I think this is valuable for at least definitely the new generation of producers,
I
because
hope so.
I think most of those producers are um, kind of forgetting about the basics of music. You know, like the fact that it comes from a human and from your hands, and not
Yeah,
from you have to use your computer as an instrument, but not
the other way
uh,
around.
yeah,
Yeah.
but not let it decide everything. I think.
No, totally true. Yeah,
Yeah.
make it live. Yeah, and
Exactly.
also don't overthink your music. Don't work on it too long, because then you don't get the spontaneous feeling if you're working on it like 2 weeks on a track. Trust me, the instant feeling you had was gone.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, back in the days when I was making music, which was done with analog gear, I was also making music with a friend of mine, and we're still best friends,
Hmm.
and we have to play together in Germany on the 23rd of the 25th of November, somewhere in Berlin.
Nice.
But when we made music, he came over to my studio, and we just sit there. We had dinner. We uh, exchanged some ideas, like let's do this, let's do that, and then we started. And when we didn't have anything that could really work within, let's say, 1.5 hour, we simply stopped, because
Yeah.
it would never work. We simply deleted the project, and that was not the day. and
Yeah.
we continue the other day or something like that.
Yeah,
So
that's
yeah,
that's a very smart tactic because again, it's a human thing, you know. It's eventually music is emotion and is
true.
feeling,
Yeah,
and if you can't really how do you say it? Like you can't really push that.
no,
It's there or it's not, but it's
no,
not like something you can really push, in my
no.
opinion.
And if it's not there, just stop. It's not the right day for it then.
Exactly,
Yeah,
it's
and
fine.
don't keep those projects because trust me, you will never finish those projects. And if you do, it will still have that feeling, which was not really a feeling anyway.
Yeah,
So it will not work. Just delete those files.
yeah,
Just,
good stuff.
yeah.
Thanks, Jeffrey, for today. It's been very valuable. I think there's a lot of stuff in there that could be used for producers in general.
Hmm.
It's been good catching up.
Yeah,
And
totally.
regarding the hardware and it's also software, right? Steering.
Yeah, it's a combination. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Like, what can people? Where can they find this?
The website is Dutch.audio. So not DutchAudio.nl or something like that, but it's Dutch. So DUTCH dot audio.
Yeah,
So
and
that's
there
the
they can
website.
order it as well.
They can order it as well. Yeah.
And
So,
you have
but
to start making it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. We're still delivering the old, the old versions of it.
Yeah,
So the basic versions, but hopefully next month we will actually release a product where I'm actually beta testing or alpha testing the plugin as we speak. So yeah,
nice.
maybe I can show you a screenshot if I turn the webcam. See if this is going to work.
Maybe that works.
Yeah. So this is the hardware. So
Oh,
this
nice.
one
Yeah.
with a display, and if I turn this, you can see
Oh,
values
yeah. And
moving
that
up and
wasn't in
down.
the first version.
That was not in the first version, and this is the alpha
Hmm.
version of the plugin. So,
And what's
so
the name? Is it Dutch Audio or is it?
yeah, it's Dutch audio, and this
What
one
is it?
is called the IC Insert Computer 1.1. So the
Okay.
IC 1.1.
And
So
it's a mastering plugin.
yeah, it's a mastering hardware, mastering insert
Yeah.
machine, control computer, whatever you call it,
Yeah.
but it's controlled with a plugin. So the plugin is not passing any audio; it's basically just
The remote.
um, a robot
Yeah.
making changes to the hardware, and the other way around. Because I can also push a button on the hardware, and it will also change right away in the plugin. And I just click save, and then
Okay.
it's all saved.
Nice.
So
Congrats with that, and
thanks,
we'll stay in touch in the future.
totally.
Thanks
Okay,
for today.
take care, man. Thank you.